Right, so for today's video, we actually have an update on a situation that I thought we were well and truly done with. I didn't think there was going to be a new update. Turns out there is, and it's a situation regarding Kiss Cafe in San Francisco and a user called It's Carla BB. I'm going to give a very fast recap of what has happened here because I believe the majority of people probably know what has happened here. We've obviously spoke about it a few times at this point, but yeah, we'd have a new update, and more specifically, we actually have an interview to look at with the former owner of Kiss Cafe, Luke Sung, who has obviously faced a lot of backlash with the way that he spoke to Carla. And let me just say this, the new interview is very different to the statement that we previously looked at from Luke, so we'll get to that. So very fast recap, right? There's a user called It's Carla BB, who, by the way, now has just under 500,000 followers. I believe she had about 13,000 when the situation started, so she has grew a lot from this. Obviously, I think a big reason as to why she grew so much is because, like, follower count was mentioned by Luke, so I think a lot of people took it upon themselves to be like, you know what? We'll get her followers up there. So Carla makes food reviews, right? And she wanted to review a restaurant called Kiss Cafe in San Francisco, and she actually organized this with one of the co-owners of the restaurant. We can see the messages right here, basically talking about how everything's gonna go. Tuesday at 5:30 works best for me. Please let me know if that works for you, and so on and so on. Sure thing, I have you down, Carla. Excited to have you at a +1. So it's not like Carla just showed up there with a camera and was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this food review, and then they didn't want her to do that. This was literally organised. But then the problems start when Carla shows up to the restaurant and one of the co-owners, the one that Carla didn't speak to, is made aware of this situation, and he actually goes up to Carla, asks what her TikTok account is, and then after looking at her videos, says that she's not at the level that she needs to be to review his restaurant.
And he starts scrolling through and playing my TikToks on full volume at the restaurant, and not even my page, just the page that comes up when you search my name. After scrolling like 2 times, he says to me that he doesn't think my videos are at the level at which he wants his restaurant to be represented. He goes on to say that my audience and my followers are not the kind of people that are going to be at his restaurant.
And then it gets even worse when Luke Sung mentions his daughter has more followers than Carla and says that Carla is not at that level.
Then he says, not to be snobby, but do you know who I am? And I say no, because I don't know who he is. He says he's a James Beard Award recipient or finalist or something, and I'm like, great, like I don't know what to say to that. And he said that his daughter has 600,000 followers on TikTok and that I'm not at that level.
So when Carla uploads this video and also like an update video following that, they go viral. In total, it's about 36 million people have seen these videos just on Carla's page, never mind the people who've like stitched it or re-uploaded it or whatever else. And of course, the restaurant starts facing a lot of backlash, more specifically, Luke Sung. The restaurant then released a statement, as we can see here, saying our chef's behaviour is unacceptable and he's no longer a part of the team as a co-owner, as chef, or in any other way. As of this post, he, Luke, has reached out to the creator with a personal apology. We then see a statement from Luke himself, but on Kiss Cafe's page, saying, "Hi everyone, I'm Luke Sung, previous chef of Kiss Cafe. Carla, I'm truly sorry for my actions towards you. I was condescending, hurtful, and intimidating. You do not deserve to be made to feel less than or unimportant. Nobody does. Regardless, I thank you for teaching me a valuable lesson in kindness and respect. There are no excuses to be made." That's interesting when we get into the new updates there. "And I've decided it's time for me to step away from Kiss Cafe permanently in all capacities." Now, another thing that's important to note here that we didn't mention in previous videos is that another creator called Etcher Sketch also uploaded a couple of videos talking about the situation, and in one specifically that comes up in the interview, hence why I'm showing you this, he goes on to mention the fact that Luke Sung actually owns multiple restaurants.
Oh, that's right. He names all of his restaurants after his kids. That's right. Multiple restaurants. Because if you look on Luke Sung's LinkedIn, it says that he's the operator of Domo Sushi. This Domo Sushi, the one on Laguna Street in San Francisco. And trust me, he and his wife own it.
So yeah, like I mentioned, that video actually gets brought up a little bit later in the interview, but let's actually get to the interview. So it's on the San Francisco Standard, and the headline says, "A conversation with the San Francisco chef taken down by a TikTok influencer." The article starts off by giving like a bit of a backstory as to what's happened. Obviously, we know what's happened at this point, so let's get to the interview part of it. So this question here is basically just saying that Carla asked to do like a collab, she showed up, his partner Eric Lynn agreed and invited her in. What happened next? To which Luke says, "She came in at 5 PM on a Tuesday, when the dining room was empty. My partner didn't tell me she was coming until she got there, and I didn't know anything about her. I thought she'd say, 'Hey, Mr. Sung, I read about you, and I'm so happy to be doing this with you,' but she showed up and sat down and didn't say hi. My high expectation for professionalism has failed me again and again. It just brings disappointment." So yeah, straight away you can see he's taking a very different approach, right? Because he does go on to kind of blame a lot of people throughout this whole interview. And I think one thing that becomes clear throughout this is that Luke probably thinks like food reviews are kind of the same as what they used to be, in a sense. Like, it would be someone coming with like a fucking notepad, you know, and writing notes down to write an article in a newspaper or a newsletter, whatever it is. And of course, nowadays, that's not the only option, right? There's a bunch of TikTokers that also do food reviews, and they tend to be the ones who get the most attention, right? Keith Lee, for example, who does food reviews. He literally just sits in his car, eats it, and gives his thoughts. And that's kind of why people trust him, right? Because it's not too over the top, like, professional. It just feels like it's someone giving their honest opinions. Now, if you remember in Carla's video, she mentions that Luke took a look through her TikTok account and was like, oh, this isn't the standard that I expect from my restaurant. He actually goes on a talk about that. Eric didn't introduce me to her or talk to her or let her know about the restaurant. I wanted to see what she did. So I started to look at her TikTok. Right away, I saw creamy spaghetti in a pan with sliced, overcooked New York steak on top that she had made. That night, I was running a special with this beautiful coho salmon. I didn't want to be misrepresented by someone who doesn't understand the difference between Atlantic salmon and king salmon. I mean, again, this bit's a bit confusing me, right? Because does he think that everybody who's going to go to his restaurant to eat is like a professional chef themselves? Like, the majority of people just want to know if like the food tastes nice, right? Like, am I going to have a good experience here? And again, I think that's why a lot of people have an interest in these like TikTok food reviewers, right? Because they feel like they're going to get more for like an honest opinion. I'm not saying that's always right or always wrong or anything like that, right? But I feel like there is a lot of people out there that would have that opinion. So I went over to her and said, hi, somewhere along the line, I think there may have been a mistake. I'm not sure if we have the same audience, I think I asked her. Have you looked up Kiss Cafe? Do you know my background? Do you know what we're trying to do? I think there was a lot of do you know, and she was intimidated, which I can understand. Luke then goes on to talk about the point where he mentions his daughter. So he says, Carla says, I know you're a wine bar and you don't have a website, as if there's no information on Google. I said, well, it's your work and you have to do your research. I know how hard my daughter Isa, an influencer, works to do her things well. She would never head to a gig unprepared. Yeah, again, I'm not really sure what he thought this was, right? It's not like the restaurant were paying her to go there and she had to do like a research and she came across saying she was like a journalist or anything, from the best of my knowledge. So I'm not really sure what he was expecting here. To me, listening to the whole situation from Carla's side to Luke's side to everything that we have heard about this, it does kind of come across like Luke does have a bit of an ego problem. I think that's fair to say, right? Especially with him saying like, do you know who I am? I've won this award and this award, all that type of stuff. Then Carla said she felt disrespected by me looking at a TikTok in front of her. She said to her husband who had just arrived, we're not going to eat here, and she left. But before she left, she said, the restaurant world is really small, there will be consequences. To which the interviewer says, she said that, and then Luke says, she said this to me for sure, 100%. I mean, obviously that's a part of the story that we haven't heard before. We obviously don't know if that was actually said. We don't really know much apart from the stuff that Carla and Luke have both said happened here. Which, reading through everything, it does feel like the majority of the stuff that Carla said did turn out to be true, right? Because Luke has confirmed a lot of it with maybe just some like extra bits in there. At this point, the interviewer asks Luke about his daughter's video, basically saying stuff like, as a daughter of immigrant parents, she has spent her whole life trying to educate her father on regulating his emotions and words. Luke is then asked what his thoughts were on that, to which he says, well, my daughter is my daughter, right? Does your father lecture you? I didn't feel like I was disrespecting Marcotte. I was actually just doing the research that my partner should have done before she came in. When she said that she felt disrespected, I said, I feel disrespected that you don't even know who the chef is. As a collaborator, you're supposed to be representing me. Yeah, like I said, this interview feels very different to the statement that we read previously, right? Because he's saying stuff like, there's no excuses, he was in the wrong, all this stuff. But reading through this interview, it really does feel like he maybe feels like he isn't in the wrong, or definitely not as much in the wrong as what a lot of people assume. Luke is then asked about the fact that he's now stepped away from the restaurant. The interviewer was saying like the internet has a short attention span, surely he could have stayed. To which Luke says, I think there would have been 80% of the people that would have continued to support Kiss Cafe, but there might have been another 20% who would come in and start things with me and say, do you know who I am? Do I have enough followers to eat here? The stuff is saying online. Which, yeah, maybe that might have happened, right? Because people have been saying that online, but that is because Luke did basically say that to Carla himself. I mean, reading this, it sounds silly, right? Like saying stuff like, do you know who I am? Do I have enough followers to eat here? But that is how the conversation went, and it really does feel like it went that way because both Luke and Carla basically confirmed it. So you remember earlier when we mentioned Ed's video and he talked about how Luke actually has multiple restaurants? This is where Luke's actually asked about that, and it says, you've also stepped away from Domo, your Hayes Valley sushi restaurant. Why? To which Luke says, a guy on TikTok named Ed Choy pointed the hate army towards Domo. People have been leaving hate comments all the way from Copenhagen, England, Malaysia. So yeah, we can see Luke here referring to it as a hate army, and reading more into this, it really does feel like that's what he believes it is, you know, just a bunch of people who came together to hate on something for no reason. Well, obviously that's not really the case here, is it? Because there is an actual situation here where Luke came across as very unlikable and was actually very rude to Carla for what seems like no reason. Towards the end of this interview, Luke is then asked what's your takeaway from this experience, to which he says, I mean, why would a young chef go and learn how to cook today if some inexperienced anybody can come in and close your restaurant? They don't even need to hear what you have to say. I mean, you can see it there. That is what Luke has took away from this experience, not the stuff that we heard in the previous apology that was posted when this was like a much more current situation where he said there was no excuses, he was in the wrong, he's not blaming Carla at all. Instead, what he's took away from this experience is that people like Carla have ruined the restaurant industry. I mean, he literally said, if some inexperienced anybody can come in and close your restaurant, as if Carla just woke up one day and thought, oh, you know, Kiss Cafe, we're taking it down. That's obviously not what happened here, right? She just explained what her conversation was with Luke, and then people formed their own opinions and acted on that with like the reviews and stuff. And I'm not saying it's okay for people to just go and like review bomb companies, especially if they've never actually been to the place themselves, but like, what are you expecting, right? Like, this isn't just a restaurant thing. This would be the same case with any business. If you're extremely rude to somebody, saying they're not at the level to post their thoughts about your restaurant, and then comparing it with your daughter who has more followers than them and saying, oh, you're not on my daughter's level, stuff like that. Obviously, people could have a problem with that. And then the final question is, now that you've closed Kiss Cafe and stepped back from Domo, what's next? To which he says, my family is going to therapy together soon. Everything is broken into pieces. I have to try and pick it up and glue it back together. I have to just let it heal. So yeah, I feel like from my opinion, reading this new interview, it kind of does feel like Lucas went away from taking the responsibility from this situation. And like I said, it really does have a different vibe to the original statement that we actually saw from Luke. Now, one person who actually responded to this article was Ed, you know, the person who was kind of called out throughout the interview, and he gives his thoughts on it.
So apparently I'm being blamed for a restaurant closing. Do you want to guess by whom? Yep, by Luke Sung of Kiss Cafe. Less than 2 weeks, 13 days to be exact, since Luke had this alleged apology published, you know, the one that many of us questioned the authenticity of, to the point that I said this in the last video. To be honest with you, this sounds pretty authentic, but we all know apologies aren't words. They're actions and follow-throughs on how you change and adapt it and learn from your mistakes. So we're gonna see how this plays out. Yeah, so Luke made it pretty clear in this article from the San Francisco Standard that he did not mean a single word of that apology.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I took away from it too. Maybe not so much like he didn't mean a single word of it, but it definitely feels like he had some other thoughts that he didn't mention in the original apology, and then I guess just decided one day he was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna say how I really feel.
For instance, when Luke was questioned about the closing of his restaurant Domo, which closed the day after my birthday, by the way, Luke stated, and I quote, a guy named Ed Choy pointed the hate army toward Domo. And even though Luke himself clarifies that the host was a business partner, not one of his employees, which means that he definitely should have the power to make decisions on the business's behalf, and there isn't a single mention about how disrespectful he was being to his business partner in their place of business.
You know what, that's actually a good point, right? His business partner organized this thing with Carla, and Luke basically took it upon himself to overrule that decision, I guess. That is a part of this that I don't think we mentioned before, but he does actually have a good point there.
And just continues to just stand by the fact that he believes that she should have known who he was. Essentially, it's all about his ego still, but he ties that towards Carla's professionalism. In the same paragraph where he does not acknowledge how unprofessional he was being to his business partner. And it's wild that Luke states 100%. In this article that his own children advised him not to speak up because they think that people are going to pick apart what he says, clearly because they know that he has ignorant beliefs and knows that he's going to say ignorant things. And while continuing to take zero accountability, he then continues to blame it on people's hateful behavior while stating that he's genuinely concerned about other people's human behaviors in this same paragraph.
Yeah, I am really baffled why he thought this interview would be a good idea. I guess maybe because he has stepped away from Kiss Cafe now and Domo, his other restaurant, has closed down, it seems. I can see why he would be incredibly frustrated at the situation, right? That's some big changes in your life. Your restaurant closing down, having to step away from another restaurant, some massive changes. That would frustrate anybody. But it should also be frustrations at yourself, because he did kind of put himself in this situation, right? With the way that he like responded to Carla. And I'm not saying that because of that he should lose his livelihood, right? I'm not saying that at all. But it's also not just a random hate army that woke up one day and decided to ruin his life, right? That's not what happened here. And I mean, the interviewer was actually right when they said that this probably would actually blow over after a while and his restaurant would have been fine. I do believe that would have actually been the case, right? It would probably be a bit rough for a little while, right? The reviews weren't exactly good. Google usually takes away them reviews. I believe they did take away a lot of the negative reviews. And I do think all in all, it probably would have been okay in the end. Who knows though, right? But I would assume that it would have been. But yeah, obviously Luke has made his decisions to actually close the other restaurants. And I assume he's probably going to open a new one at some point if he's been a chef for so long.
For instance, when he was asked about how this would have gone down differently in the year 2000, Luke stated a food writer would have known about the sweat and blood that went into this work, as if Carla ever got the chance to get there, not acknowledging anything about his behavior and his bloated sense of ego of how people should know who he is. And then Luke goes on to talk about how restaurants are a place for misfits to come together, except then he goes on to talk about how maybe they have problems communicating, or maybe they're impatient, or maybe they're in so much pain they don't want to be alone, and basically they're codependent. Yeah, no. These are all behavioral issues, not people who are professionally misfits. And then Luke goes on to talk about how he's an immigrant and how immigrants have to take these odd jobs sometimes when they come to a different country, and then immediately somehow segues into how you have to be proud to be a chef, and then talks about how that's the reason why he talked to Carla that way, again, tying that to being an immigrant.
Yeah, I mean, saying the fact that he's proud to be a chef is the reason why he spoke to Carla like that doesn't really make much sense, right? Because if you are so proud to be a chef, when Carla comes in and she's going to be filming this video, why not explain what you're proud of and what you think she should know about the restaurant before making the video? Don't just go up to her and go, you didn't do your research, you're not at this level. Maybe go over, introduce yourself, say, oh, there's some things I would like to kind of tell you about the restaurant, I'm Luke Sung, this is my background, so and so. That would have been a much better way to go around it. But instead he decided to go around it by being rude for literally no reason. Now, Ed actually ends his video by basically saying that Luke seems like he has a bit of an overinflated ego.
And cumulatively, it seems like Luke is displaying a pattern of behavior where he seems to have an overinflated ego. And maybe it's because of that ego, or maybe it's just because you've gotten away with things like this for so long, but I need you to understand something very clearly, Luke. This is no one else's fault but yours. Just because people try to shine a light on something that you're trying to do while no one is looking still means that the only person doing anything wrong is you. So good luck with that healing, because the only thing that's broken that needs to be fixed is you.
Yeah, I mean, look, in my opinion, Luke didn't really come across very well in that interview, and especially considering it was so different from his original statement, it does kind of make his original statement feel a bit fake. And like I said before, I don't feel like he should have his whole livelihood ripped away, right? I'm sure Luke is probably going to open another restaurant and probably be successful. It seems like he was very successful before this. I think the main people I feel sorry for that obviously haven't really been mentioned throughout this whole situation is obviously Carla as well, but also the workers at these restaurants who literally had nothing to do with this. They are people that have now lost their jobs out of nowhere because of something that they couldn't control. And I really do feel sorry for them. Regarding Kiss Cafe, it did seem like in the statement they are going to be carrying on, probably rebranding, right? Changing the names. But hopefully that does mean that the employees there do stay the same, right? And they haven't lost their jobs. In an ideal world, that is exactly what happens. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. But either way, with all this being said, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts on the statement in comparison to the original statement that we read from Luke? And yeah, just let me know your overall thoughts, and I'm going to leave it there. So if you did enjoy the video, please leave a like down below, subscribe if you are new, and until the next one, I'll see you guys in a bit. Alright, goodbye.